I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us is the man and his team, Dr. Mark Skidmore from Michigan State University, who uncovered the $25 trillion in undocumented expenses at the Department of Defense and Housing and Urban Development. He did this with a team of people from Michigan State University. He is a PhD in economics. He also is an expert in public finance. He had a team of at least graduate students and PhD candidates working on this project, and they came up with $25 trillion. But what happened when the mainstream media got a hold of this? Well, let's just start with the Washington Post and their editors and their owners. They made it out like this was no big deal, that it was not really a story, that they counted the same toilet seat 100 times and everything canceled each other out and there were plugs. I don't know what that means. Dr. Mark Skidmore writes me in a fit saying, wow, that's not what I said. And I have him on now to talk about the journalism and why the $21 trillion undocumented expenses, the, as they say, missing money. We don't know how much is fraud and how much is not. Why this is a huge story to every American and maybe everybody in the world, the $21 missing trillion. First of all, Dr. Mark Skidmore, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, thanks again for having me back on, and I really appreciate all the work that you do. So glad to be here.
I want to start with the Washington Post, and I know how this works, Dr. Skidmore. This was not one reporter. You don't do a story about $25 trillion that you don't know where it is and have no idea what happened in the books. And the Army itself said they couldn't find the DOD, couldn't find 6.5 trillion. Their own numbers, their own admission, we can't find 6.5 trillion. So you don't have a story like you was done at the Washington Post, which completely killed this $21 trillion story. Washington Post, and I'll just say it because I think that what they did was assassinate a story. Their bosses were in on it. It wasn't like a cat in a tree and the guy got it wrong. Everybody at the Washington Post knew this was going on, and they worked to kill this idea and tell everybody it's not a problem. Why? Tell us your experience with the Washington Post and why what they did was totally wrong and dangerous for the public.
Well, first of all, I would say they're trying to kill it. I don't think they've killed the story. There's a lot of layers and a lot of things going on. So with the Washington Post piece, it was a focus on Representative Ocasio-Cortez's comment about, well, $21 trillion, that could have paid for social programming. And so it was sort of like a truth-finding kind of thing. And they referred back to Dave Lindorf's piece in The Nation talking about the $21 trillion. But basically what they said was, well, this is just all plugs, and there's stuff, a mix-up in the transactions. It's not really that big of a deal. It's 21 trillion. They didn't say it wasn't 21 trillion in transactions that can't be verified, but discounted it fully and then focused all on sort of, well, Ocasio-Cortez is just misinformed and she's made a mistake. And then, of course, Ocasio-Cortez comes back and says, yeah, all right, I didn't really know what I was talking about. And so all of the focus went on that, but they didn't, whether it's Dave Lindorf's piece in The Nation or all of these fact-checking pieces, what's missing is the fact that none of us have been able to get access to any of the underlying information. And so Lindorf's conclusion that these are all plugs in his article in The Nation is based on what people said. But he
doesn't know that. That's the problem. It's based on people that didn't look at the budgets, don't have the information. It's a hit shop. He don't know that. Yeah. He made it up. He made it up.
That's what Lindorf concludes based on
because he made it. I'm sorry, doctor. Let's call it what it is. He made it up. It's not what you said. He has no information to come to that conclusion.
You're right. He said that's what I said in an NPR interview, which was untrue. We had a discussion about it. So those conclusions you can't make unless you look at the underlying data.
Unless you're making up a story to calm the public. And when you contacted him and said, hey, I didn't say that, what did he say?
he said, well, it's a, it was a mix-up on NPR, and they cut things out, and it made it sound like I said that you said this, and it was just a big mix-up. So it could be NPR cutting things out in a way that made it look like I said that. I didn't say that. I never said that.
That'd be hard to do, because he basically said something you didn't say. I mean, what you were telling me when we first started doing this about having, it's typically you find 1%. What's 1% of $21 trillion? What's 1%? $210 billion?
Million.
210 million.
So trillion.
21 trillion. So what's 1% of
$21 billion? So that's a lot of money to lose track of, right?
Well, and that you say after 1%, we're fighting over $5 billion, 5.7 billion for a border wall.
Let me give you some context. Let's say we go private sector. I have a friend who was a high-level accountant at a major corporation, and we were talking about this issue. And these adjustments, these unsupported adjustments, that's what they call them. And she says, anytime you have an expenditure that's greater than $15 and there's no supporting documentation, we will go track it down and try to find it. That's how tight it is, right? Right. So when you start looking at the mess that could possibly generate $21 trillion in transactions that are unverified, missing money, it's like, it's inconceivable. It's so big, it's so huge, it's inconceivable that it could just be a comedy of errors, right?
It's fraud. You think there's a high percentage of fraud?
I think there is. Yeah. I believe there's a tremendous amount of fraud embedded in there, So sometimes I'm a little hesitant to say, well, what do I know, right? Because I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, and I want to be sure, based on the information I have, that whatever I say I can verify, not based on what somebody else said, but what I can say from these documents. And so when we get to these numbers, the odds that there's no fraud in $21 trillion of transactions is just, it's mind-boggling. You can't wrap your mind around it. It's so huge. Which
the
is
odds are,
said.
What would you say the odds there's no fraud? What would you say the odds are that there is no fraud with $21 trillion, that they won't tell you what they did, and it's undocumented expenses, missing money? What are the odds of it being $21 trillion that there's zero fraud?
Zero. I can't imagine a situation where it's just a comedy of errors and we're just not good at this and we've got a mess. But we're honest, right? I don't think that's the case.
The press, I want to come back to that because you were upset when you wrote me and said, I didn't say any of this. I called the reporter and, I'm paraphrasing, but you said, I didn't say any of this. Well, I got it wrong. Did the reporter tell you they got it wrong?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Did the reporter, when you asked him and said, hey, you mischaracterized this, you said that that there was plugs. I didn't say that this is nothing, that this is everything cancels each other out. You were asking the reporter, I think it was the Washington Post guy, and you said that he told you, or Lindor, I don't know who it was.
Lindor.
Okay, yeah. I don't know which of the liars you talked to because they are so incompetent that they can't be that incompetent, or their bosses are in on this. You know that, right? The bosses are in on this. You don't do a story about 21 trillion missing at HUD and DOD without everybody in the organization laying their eyes on it. You know that, right?
I believe that.
So the organization has basically killed the idea that this is a problem. Would you say that's true?
So when I talked with Lindor, in the week before,
he's at NPR, right?
Yeah,
okay.
No, Dave Lindorf is the author of the article that appeared in The Nation.
Okay.
He's the investigative reporter that was on NPR talking about this issue.
Yeah.
And I talked with him.
Excuse me. Let's just call it what it is. He was misrepresenting this issue.
Yeah. Well,
he was not telling the public the truth. Am I wrong?
It was not what I said. It was not right.
Okay.
It was not right.
Okay. All right. I just want to, because what I see as a journalist is that this story came to the surface and got dunked.
Yeah, it did get dunked. Well, at least in this context, right? I mean, there's lots of other things. It's sort of nonlinear how information flows through the internet, and there's so many layers. So Washington Post and all these fact checks, the media, of course it gets dunked.
But they did it on. But they did it as they wasn't a reporter. This wasn't a cat in the tree, as I've said. This wasn't a cat in the tree. This wasn't just the reporter going, "Hey, y'all, I'm going to put this story. I'm going to slap it on the front page, or I'm going to slap it on the Washington Post, or the Nation, or NPR." That's not the way it works. Hey, I got a story about 21 trillion missing dollars. What? Where? A Department of Defense and HUD. Oh yeah, we don't care about that. Do what you want. Do you think that happened?
Oh, absolutely not.
Everybody knew about it.
And some amount of negotiation, lots of layers of things happening.
Do you think that they intentionally misrepresented? Stop for a minute. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. I want to get to the bottom of this. Do you think they intentionally misrepresented you?
At some level, this was intentionally misrepresented. I believe that, yes.
And the reason why you think, and I know you don't know for sure, but why do you think they misrepresented this 25 trillion? I think we can all imagine how scared they were with this, but why do you think that it was misrepresented? Why did you think they made this look across these platforms that this is not a problem? Public, don't worry about this. Why do you think they did that?
That's a good question. There are so many layers to this, right? I mean, if I've always said we should be able to have more transparency. We should be able to see what some of these transactions are presumably for, so that we can assess. And you know, for example, I told Lindorf and others all along the way, try to get your hands on 170 adjustments amounting to $2.1 trillion. That was in the Army's report that had indicated the 6.5 trillion. There's just 170 transactions.
And that you could say, okay, tell you what, let's look at
access to that, right?
Let's look at the Army's own missing 6.5 trillion that they did not bring up in the. I read the articles. They did not bring that up.
No, it was. We
have the Army admitting, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon admitting we can't find 6.5 trillion. So here's how you find out what happened with these 170 expenses. Did you think they got that? I don't think they even asked for it because they didn't bring it up in their story.
No. Lindorf told me he put in a FOIA request, never got any information for it. It wasn't in his article. So, you know, to me, that's sort of a string you could pull on. You can say, well, maybe nobody at the OIG can answer the question where $21 trillion went. But they could provide information on 2.1 trillion because it's just 170 transactions, and that's what they say in their own report. What are those for? Produce an addendum or a spreadsheet, and let's see.
Yeah, and here's what I'm saying about journalism. Why you made this point to me, I remember it. That you think, wow, what a point! 6.5 trillion. Their own documentation says 6.5 trillion. They'd like to find out what happened to this 170 transactions. Why didn't these people put in at least, we're talking about $6,500 billion. Again, we're arguing over $5 billion for a wall of the southern border. You're talking about $6,500 billion, 6.5 trillion. Am I right?
I can't know the mind of another.
But why did they? Hold on, let me get this. You told him
what is going on, right?
I know, but you told him about this, and this did not end up in his story.
I told him repeatedly about it. I've talked with others repeatedly, and nothing in the mainstream media, except for the recent Forbes pieces that I wrote with Lawrence Kotlikoff, have anything about the 170 transactions, because I think that's actually a string you could pull on. You can say, you know what, I have a question about the massive amounts of adjustments, and so in this 6.5 trillion, there's 2.1 trillion embodied in 170 transactions. Let's pull on that string, and nobody's pulling on it.
Then what I'm saying is that they were dishonest.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a big fact that you could point out and say, okay, don't believe me. Believe their own report. They say they can't find 6.5 trillion. They say there's what, $2 trillion in this 170 transactions. Nobody reported that.
That's absolutely right.
And that to me is what they were doing was thumping. And I know you don't know what's in their minds, but listen, this is not just a reporter at the Nation or a reporter at the Washington Post or everybody all the way up this chain knew about this. Now I want to ask you, why is this 21 trillion missing dollars? Why should this scare the bejesus out of every American? Why?
So we have no clue what is going on within our own governmental system, on the implications for the financial system, and now, and as you talked with last week with Catherine Austin Fitz, who we've been working together on this, in the midst of all of the DOD hoopla with the audit, Standard 56 was implemented by the government, in which now we have two sets of books. Right?
And just so everybody knows, there is FASB, FASB, the Financial Standards Accounting Board, and then what you're talking about, FASAB, right?
Yeah, Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board. That's a board that provides advice and input into how the government reports its.
And you're talking about Rule 56.
Yep, Standard 56.
Okay.
And so, so before, through all of this experience that we've had, at least we had the reporting laws in our favor. Government is supposed to have a level of transparency and honesty in reporting. There's, the black budget, which we can't know what's going on, at least since the 1970s. But at least there was supposed to be a framework that we're operating under, and they didn't comply with it, so it was non-transparent, as we've shown with the 21 trillion in transactions that we can't verify, right? So, but now, as of October 4th, just in time for the DOD audit report, we have effectively put two sets of books. We have a set of books that can be manipulated and changed by a group of people who's determined that it's a national security issue, and they can alter the numbers, move things around within a particular entity, or even potentially shift funding all the way in order to hide it. And so what we're gonna do is produce a financial statement that is fake, and we will have no idea how much money was moved around, and we're all gonna pretend that we have a real report. And then we have an actual report that will remain hidden. And so to me, 21 trillion, we should have hearings under oath. We should have access to underlying data, and I'll keep pushing as best I can from the position that I'm in for that. But from this point forward, unless this Standard 56 is overturned, we don't have any recourse. We can, the government can say, well, this is a national security issue, and we're not going to tell you what's going on.
Is this, so the reporting, I'm summing up the reporting, that this is not a story. Everything cancels each other out. There was a bunch of plugs. They counted the same toilet seat or the same screw 1,000 times. There's nothing to do, this story's not a story. Would you agree with that or not? And if not, why?
It's fake. It's fake news. It's not real.
So your experience with the Washington Post, the Nation, and these people, they basically misrepresented the story.
It's not what I've indicated all along. It's not my view.
They totally misrepresented you. Is that right, or am I wrong? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Did they represent you correctly?
No, they did not. They didn't even, most places didn't even ask me, right? You go to Washington Post, did Washington Post ask me what I think? No. Did the Nation think, well, Dave Lindorf, of course I interacted with him, but all these political fact check, the only call I got was from the New York Times. They actually asked me what I thought.
Did they publish that?
Yeah.
You said there's a big problem.
Yeah, I did, and they published it.
Wow.
It was a fact check. They did.
They
to some degree. It was just a short blurb, right?
Of course. $25 trillion. Excuse me. I keep saying 25. I'm sorry. $21 trillion missing, and it just gets a little short blurb. Yeah. Now, we're fighting over $5.7 billion for wall funding, and that's splattered all over the front page of every organization. Don't you think that's bizarre? You think that's journalism?
It's a rounding error. It's so minor.
21 trillion. dollars that they don't know where it is. The Army, the DOD admits we don't know where 6.5 trillion is. That's their own accounting. That's not you, that's them. They wrote it down in a report. And that's not a story other than a little blurb. We got a problem. Am I right
Yep.
about that?
Yep.
You think that's journalism?
It's not journalism.
You see how bizarre this is?
Of course. Of course it's bizarre. We live in it's a bizarre situation. I mean, as I loved your wrap up on Friday, because you listed all of the different things where we just have fake fraud stuff going on, right? And I try really hard on all these layers, like the mark to market, and the change, so that now firms can value assets at whatever they want, in whatever they think it'll be worth in the future.
Right.
This was done to save the financial institutions, because they had all these, during the financial crisis, they had all these properties that were worth nothing. And so they're saying, well, we're just going to revise and change the rules. And so now we don't even have any idea really what the valuation of these firms are.
Yeah, it used to be.
And so you went through.
It used to be. I just want to interrupt you. It just like people said. It used to be mark to market was you have an asset on your books. What can I sell it for today? $1. Okay, that's worth $1. Not 60 grand.
Right.
And so now they went to mark to fantasy. But go ahead. You were talking about all the frauds. It's unbelievable. I left out a bunch of stuff. Go ahead.
So you listed a number of things, and I try as hard as I can to go back to original source documents and not just rely on what somebody says, And so you can go back yourself and find the changes in these rules, et cetera. And we live in this environment where, it's very difficult. We don't have free markets. We have interventions. We have rules that hide and conceal. So we pretend that these financial institutions are solvent, but we really don't know, because they can value their assets at whatever they think it's going to be worth in the future. Now we're going to report financial statements for the government, and we have no idea what they changed, because they'll never tell us. And we're going to all most of us may not even know that that's the case, but we're all going to pretend that, yes, this financial report is useful. I want to read you a quote for your audience. Let me see if I can find it here.
Well, while you're looking for that, I want to say, listen, I think you are a patriot. I mean, there is no bigger story as a reporter. I work for 5 TV stations, an investigative reporter for 2 networks. When you tell me that you're missing $21 trillion and the Department of Defense admits to $6.5 trillion, and that's not a story, that doesn't freak out everybody in the media. And they did a little line in the New York Times, a big lie in the Washington Post, another big lie in the Nation, a big lie about this is not to move along. It's not a big. This is a huge story. I know what a story is. I don't know much about anything, but I know how to source a story. Okay, this is a huge story, and here you have an expert in public finance, a tenured economics professor with a team of PhD and master's degree students, uncovers this giant fraud in your name, and by your definition, and that's not a story. You're a patriot, man. You're sticking your neck out here. You're sticking your neck out here.
Well, you're kind. Am I a patriot? I'm just trying to do a small part. I think of you as being a patriot. I was thinking back to the financial crisis, and somebody had questioned the 21 trillion, and so I had some time to kind of lay out my thinking about issues. And Greg, I went back to your original CNN transcripts where you warned that the financial system was going to blow and the housing market was going to crash. I could see that you were trying to tell people that this is really unstable. And at the very same time, we have Ben Bernanke, who is the former chair of the Federal Reserve, saying, you know what, we've got this contained. We should be fine. Everything's good. And Ben Bernanke was wrong, or he lied, right? He just didn't tell the truth. You did, right? And so what happened to you? Well, CNN didn't renew your contract. Why? You were trying to tell the truth and get to the bottom of things. The chairman of the Federal Reserve was saying something that just wasn't true. He had to have known that things were very unstable. And so he gets rewarded with a nice position at the Brookings Institute. He's the president of the American Economic Review. American Economic Review, the American Economic Association. So that's sort of the elite of the elite among economists. And he's rewarded for not telling the truth. And so I struggle, right? So what I'm trying to do is just shed some light and say, I'm asking these questions, and maybe it's a drop in the bucket, but at least I'm trying to make a contribution that I can sleep at night.
The 21 trillion is not a drop in the bucket. There is no financial story in America bigger than this. Period. The end. There is no. If there is a financial story bigger than the missing $21 trillion, they have no idea what happened to. Please tell me what it would be. I think this is the biggest story that we've ever had, financial story in American history. That's what I think, because there's no parallel in history in America, at least America, and I don't think in human history, where they lost $2,100 billion.
And so it's so large and astounding. It's really something. I want to read this quote from D. Scott Showalter. He's the chair of the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board. This is in a forthcoming issue of the AGA journal that will come out this spring. And so he's talking about the decision to create fake books that, essentially, and you can go on Catherine Austin's website to get information about what this represents. You can
Solari.com.
Solari.com, missingmoney, get information about what's going on and what this change in the standard represents. You can go to the Forbes article that was published last week by Lawrence Kotlikoff and me and get a good summary of what that is. But basically, in this decision that was recommended and accepted by our government, this is what Showalter says. He says, the board concluded that finding a way to include most financial information correctly in public financial statements was better than not providing financial statements publicly. So basically he's saying, if we didn't do this, we're not going to report anything at all. It's that bad. And
so they're going to report something fake.
Yeah. And furthermore, it's not,
You can't, dude, I'm sorry. I just got to say, you can't make this up.
You can't. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me that this just sailed through. And there were a few people, a few agents said, you know what, the usual thing is that we redact sensitive things. We should just stay with that. And the OIG actually said, no, we don't really like this change, right? We think it's a blow to transparency. We can do better. But this rule about being able to move funds around applies to all federal entities, not just potentially sensitive like DOD, where there's a national security issue going on. It applies to everything. HUD, the
Department of Education
Credit
is now,
Services.
Department of Education is a national security
Department of
issue.
Education.
It's all a national security issue.
Right, and so we don't know. And the way the rule is set, they can't even tell us that they made modifications. So you have no idea whether it was $1 million or billions of dollars. And I just don't understand. I mean, it's la la land, as Catherine would say. So in the conclusion of the Forbes piece that I wrote with Kotlikoff, I said, if you're an owner of government treasuries or bonds, caveat emptor. You don't even know if these reports are solid or not. Before we didn't know because we had problems complying with the law.
But at least you knew there was a problem.
Yeah. So we had problems. We weren't complying with the law, but now with this change, you'll never know.
All right, I want to wrap this up, and I want you to tell the American public, number one, obviously this is a big problem, the $21 trillion. I think it's the biggest financial fraud in the history of the world. It's certainly the history of America. And I want you to tell every American why this 21 trillion is something that you need to pay attention to. And I want to know what you feel in your gut, why it's so important, and what bad could happen because we don't know about it. So, two questions. Why should every American be interested in this, and what bad could happen because of this? What's your fear?
Well, there's so many layers to why you should care about this. Some people I talk with say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, and it's just a big mess, and it's like, well, it's your tax dollars. It's potential implications for what might be going on underneath the surface are so enormous. It seems self-explanatory that if our government can't track 21 trillion, that there's something deeply wrong, and that we should have access to more information. And there's so much that's secret right now that we don't really know. You can't make effective decisions unless you have real information. And so, and if it's, imagine the potential financial implications. Imagine the potential for other countries that buy our bonds.
Which are what? What are the implications? What scares you about this? What's that down in your gut? What scares you, in simple terms, about the missing 21 trillion?
I wonder how much money was flowing. Really, how much money was flowing in and out for secret purposes. I wonder what the potential implications are if other countries and entities were heavily dependent on deficit spending right now. What happens if we're not able to get the funding that we need? What are the implications for our economy? What are the implications for interest rates? Right now, the debt is hovering around $22 trillion. If interest rates even increase modestly, it blows out the budget. And so you have all this pressure on various layers. We're also the reserve currency of the world. And that requires that, we have nothing other than confidence in the government backing our currency. So if people lose confidence in our government, they will then in turn lose confidence in the currency. So the reserve currency status is potentially at stake. And I'm a big fan of, I think, in order, if we don't have any kind of transparency, what does it? It's an existential thing, right? What does our country become or becoming? And Catherine will say it's fascist, and I think she's right. If we don't have the laws in our favor and we don't stand up for our Constitution, what does that mean for us and our children? So I think mainly about my kids. What does it mean when we have totally fake books?
Wow. This little excursion could completely crash the dollar as we know it, the Federal Reserve note. This may force the president into creating a new currency. The implications of that are mind-boggling.
It would suggest there's reason that some would want to hide it, right? There's a lot at stake. I for one,
incidentally, I just want people to know too. Your work showed this 21 missing trillion long before President Trump even ran for office. Wow, what a surprise that must have been when he found out. Excuse me, wait, what? Wait, there's another 21 trillion on top of what we already have. That you don't know where it is. Can you imagine him being a fly on the wall when he found that out?
I can only imagine. And what we found are transactions that were deemed to be unsupported by the Office of the Inspector General, and we just listed them and put them all in one place, and we started asking questions of which we've never gotten any answers. But there's another thing that's kind of interesting about all of it. This is just a smattering, right? The OIG doesn't produce any kind of these evaluations on a regular basis. And so in some, so that's number one. Number two, in some of these reports, there are trillions of dollars of supported adjustments. And so actually Dave Lindorf made this point. These supported adjustments, the OIG says, well, we didn't actually go in and look at these trillions of dollars of supported transactions. What we did is we just looked to see if a high-level official approved it or not. And that's all they did, right? And so now you have trillions of dollars of adjustments that were deemed to be supported because somebody, but we don't have actual underlying data. Well, what are these transactions for? What is the nature of them? And nothing is coming forward.
I want to just leave with one last thing that you could say concrete, and this goes back to your if 1% of a $1 billion budget you can't find, okay, you get more than 1%, and it's fraud. Okay, we're talking about 1%. If there's one thing you could say about this undocumented expenses, missing 21 trillion, whatever you want to call it, could you say that this is pointing towards massive fraud? If there's one thing you could say about the missing 21 trillion, could you say it points to a massive government fraud?
Yeah, it points to what I've tried to do over the past number of years is just look at the facts, and then you draw your conclusions based on what those facts are. And in this case, you can't. You have to think about what the likely conclusion is. And in my mind, I can't prove it. I'm not an insider. I can look at these reports and I can say our own government says that we've got transactions that we can't account for in the multiple trillions of dollars. Why can't we look at that? And so, and then when everything is blocked, I'm an economist by training, and I've had about 10 things over this period that all favor non-transparency and opaqueness and hiding, ranging from, in the beginning, these original documents being taken down from the website. Well, let's suppose that, the OIG says, well, we were just revamping our website. And so it's not that we were trying to hide anything. We just, the links changed. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If you flip a coin 50-50, there's a 50% chance that you'll get a heads. But along the way, the latest report for, I think it was the Navy, it's fully redacted, all blacked out. Never before had any of these reports been redacted. Why all of a sudden was it a national security issue? Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, a 50% chance that, well, it was just the wise thing to do under the circumstances at this particular time. But there are like 10 different things. So what's the probability if you flip a coin you get a head? Well, 50%. You flip it again, what's the probability that you'll get another head? That's about 25%, right? 50, 25, and it's halved every time. So the chances that we would always end up on a head or always end up on hiding or, protecting is so small, it's infinitesimal. So it's like clearly somebody is trying to hide. And I just don't think that's compatible with our republic. And so I'm going to do the best I can to shine some light.
But you think that, and I'm going to go back to my original question, the probability, you think that the one thing you can say, and you've said this to me before, that, listen, it's the one thing you could say is that it's fraud. So is that the one thing you could say about the 21 missing trillion dollars at that? If you could say anything else, you could just say there's something wrong. It's fraudulent.
Yes, absolutely. In my mind, I can't come to any other conclusion.
That the $21 trillion is one big ball of how much, we don't know, but there's a giant fraud component in the missing 21 trillion. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want you to say.
I just don't see how you can come up with those huge numbers based on public budgeting without something terribly gone wrong. It's not just plugs. I've never said that, and I've always said you want to go back in and look at the transactions, and we're not given access to that.
I understand, but
why not? I just think the likelihood that this is fraud in my mind is on a massive scale.
We're going to leave it right there. I didn't want to put words in your mouth. I just wanted somebody who is an expert in public budgets, and a PhD in economist, a PhD level economist with a team of people to say, okay, there's one thing you can say: there's massive fraud. How much? We don't know, but it's fraudulent.
I think so. I believe so.
And you know what? And I'm going to end with this. With all the reporting, is that did not come across in any of the reporting. It was nothing to see here, folks. It's all right. Go to sleep. Go back to sleep. It's okay. Don't worry about the value of your currency, the value of your bonds, us changing the currency, losing the world reserve currency status. Don't worry about the massive fraud that is lingering here that would affect every American and maybe everybody in the world. Don't worry about that. There's nothing to see here. That was another giant fraud. The media committed a fraud on the public.
Yep. It wasn't accurate. It was wrong. It's distorted.
And they misquoted you. They said things you didn't even say. And then left out stuff you said was important.
Yeah. I think omission is the biggest thing, right? Omission and then characterizing things in a way that aren't necessarily accurate. Because somebody at some high level said, well, that's what's going on, without actually looking at it.
Yeah. A big disservice to the public. The public, last question, should the public be worried about this missing $21 trillion? Is it a big deal?
It's existential. They should be worried about it. I think they should be worried about Standard 56. Most people aren't aware of it. Most people don't think accounting standards matter that much. It's a kind of a detail. But this enables the government, our federal government, to produce fake reports, just fake. And we have no idea how fake they are, because they explicitly says, we're not going to tell you where it's fake. And only a small number of people, and it's not clear who those people are going to determine that it's a national security issue. And those same people will be given the authority to restate the budgets in a way that hides activity. And we'll never have any idea. Somebody was asking me, well, what do you think about the audit report? And I said, well, with these new standards, I'm not sure why I would take much time to look at them, because I have no idea how much they were restated, moved around, and how would I know?
They can legally say whatever they want.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's an existential kind of thing.
It's a threat to the republic.
Absolutely.
Dr. Mark Skidmore, okay, you say one more thing? In closing, anything you want to say?
No, thank you for having me on. Thank you for all the work that you do.
Well,
and we'll get to the bottom of it. We just keep plugging.
Well, thank you for talking about the journalism, because that's one of my expertises. And when I was reading these reports you were sending me, getting your email saying, here's what the report says, and you're sending me saying, I didn't say any of that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have you on to talk about this, because they basically dunked the story. They basically said it's not a problem. Ocasio-Cortez, socialist Sandy, just crazy. Actually, she wasn't so crazy. You could pay for a lot with $21 trillion. And I'm not for her at all. I'm not for socialism, communism, I'm not for any of that. But they made her out to be crazy, and she actually wasn't, for a change.
We don't. That's our point in the article that I wrote with Kotlikoff that came out last week in his Forbes column. Makes that point. We don't actually know. We should be able to look at these transactions and find out what they were for, and we're blocked. And
you'll send me the link for that. We'll put that up too, so people can see it. We'll do that. And thank you, Dr. Mark Skidmore. Thank you for being a patriot and exposing the $21 trillion and coming back on and telling us that it's still a problem. It's a big problem, and it's a threat to the America, to the Constitution, and to every American. Dr. Mark Skidmore, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks again, Greg.